This is going to be a little annoying to hear, but I really wish that I had learned this earlier on in my sobriety attempts. I tried to get sober for like 15 years, and the most that I could ever get was 94 days. I just kept relapsing, and I was trying. Every time I went to rehab, I was trying. I would listen in meetings. I got a sponsor. I would read the stuff. I was trying, and I kept using anyways. And I kind of wish that this concept had been broken down to me in this manner of simplicity back then, because this was like the missing piece for me in my efforts, which is this. Long-term success in sobriety boils down to you really want to use, maybe day 1, day 2, and you don't. And then later that night, you really want to use, and you don't. And then the next day you really want to use and you don't. And you do that 20, 30 times and you look up and you have 90 days. And then you do it another 20, 30 times and you look up and you have 6 months, 9 months. And then you do it again 10 more times and you have a year. And it really is as simple as in the past when you are faced with the opportunity to use, and you do it, and then breaking that code. And in the future, when you have that moment, instead, you make a different choice. And I know that that sounds so irritatingly, annoyingly, overly simplified, but I'm going to give you guys some tools to make that happen, because it's one thing to know that, and then it's another to, in the moment, not be so compelled to go that you just do it despite what you actually want to do internally. This past January, I celebrated 10 years of sobriety after many years of trying and really dark consequences. Homelessness, jail. My last arrest was for strong arm robbery. I know some of you guys that, follow me or follow the show know I lived in a doghouse in the end, and really bad consequences, and couldn't break the code on this anyways. So I want to share with you guys a couple of stories that will give you some tools to hopefully help you in one of those moments make a different choice, or set yourself up so that one of those moments actually doesn't even happen. Also, my nails, I know I'm missing some nails. I switched to tap gel. You guys, these are the problems I have today. Far cry from living in a doghouse. I can't get the tap gel off, and I haven't had time to go in. I know it looks so bad. Please ignore my hands. But those are the problems I have now, right? It was like living in a doghouse, and now it's that I can't get my bougie tap nails off. I'd take this any day. So I had like 3 weeks clean, maybe. I had detoxed pretty much cold turkey. I'd had one Suboxone with me at a friend's house, and I came back to this sober living, and I was getting sober in the areas that I used in, which is obviously not impossible, but can be very difficult. I mean, every bus stop, every time I went on the train here, it's called the Sprinter, I would see someone that I used with or somebody that I bought from. I mean, it was everywhere. Every corner had a memory attached to me doing some low-level criminal activity or using some hustle. But that was where I could afford to be. So that just was what it was. So I was at McDonald's, and the McDonald's in this neighborhood is like where people would use in the bathroom, because the bathroom was like kind of, you could just walk in and go right in without having to pass anybody at the registers. And so it was definitely like a hot spot for junkies to go use. So I was in that McDonald's, and as I was leaving, I saw someone that I used with a lot. And he was like, "Hey, where you been?" And I said, "Oh, around." And he was like, "All right, get your ass in here. I got a shot for you." A shot. A free shot. And I was still kind of sick. I only had like 3 weeks. I didn't want to be rude because he was my friend. And I was like, "Okay, sure, thanks. 1 second. Just I'll be right back." And I really wanted to do it, but I really didn't want to do it too. You guys know how that goes. And I ran up the hill to my sober living. I sprinted up the hill. My sober living manager was standing outside, and he and I had a really combative relationship. He saved my life, and I put him through the ringer, and he would get really irritated with me and frustrated with me. And I had lived there multiple times before and had been kicked out, and he was doing me a massive favor by even letting me stay there again. I was running up the hill, and I saw him outside. He was outside smoking a cigarette. And I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to make a different choice here. I'm going to tell him what just happened, right? So I run up. I was like, "Hey, oh my gosh, I just saw, so-and-so at McDonald's, and he offered me a free shot. And, I really want to do it, but I'm not, here I am, and I'm telling you, and I'm all like proud of myself." And I'm like, "But it's free heroin, and who doesn't do free heroin?" And I just kept thinking, it's free. Like, I would have loved to have had free dope at one point in my life. And he said, "That shit isn't free. That isn't free. What does that cost you in your lifetime? That's the worst return on investment I've ever seen a human being make. That isn't free. Are you crazy? That isn't free." And I thought, okay, yeah, you're right. Okay, it's not free. You're right. and I just walked up to my apartment, and he came in like 2 minutes behind me, and he was like, you know what, I'm not done with you. And I remember thinking, of course you're not. And before he could even say anything else, I kind of interrupted him. He had been a crack addict. He had about 10 years when we were having this conversation, and he had been a really bad crack addict, been to prison 8 times. And I said, Steve, if somebody offered you crack, do not tell me you wouldn't stop for a second and like think about it. Don't act like you wouldn't struggle with that. And he cut me off before I could even finish. And he was like, no, that would never even happen to me because I've taken a stand in this community and people know who I am, and that would never even happen to me. You have been living a criminal lifestyle and an addict lifestyle for so long. You cannot ride that line. You have to take a stand. You're like a little kid that's going to bed every night on the edge of the bed and keeps falling out in the middle of the night and has no idea why she keeps falling out of the bed. You need to be all the way up against the wall when you sleep. You have got to take a stand. And something in that moment struck me about being half in that world and half not. And what that looked like for me in action was I finally did delete contacts and block contacts on social media of people that I used to use with. And I really didn't want to do that because I disagree still to this day that every addict you used with is bad news. Some of them are, but mostly they're just other addicts. And like, they were my friends and they were good people too. But the reality is their life choices no longer align with my goals. And that doesn't mean they're bad people, but it does mean that my life may not progress if I'm still connecting with them. And so in that moment, I did finally delete contacts, and I made a choice. I need to be the person in the sober living that you know she is serious about her recovery. Like, because I was also the person that if you relapsed, you could come to me and be like, bro, I fucked up. And I could say, okay, well, what did you do? Like, I can try to help you pass a drug test, blah, 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 blah. Like, I was the person that you could like confide in. And I was like, I got to be not that person. I got to be the person where you're like, dude, if you don't tell Janine because she'll tell on you. And that went against like every instinct in my body in terms of my addiction nature and from when I had been using. And I decided if I'm going to do this for real, I need to completely take a stand. He's right. I need to be the person in the house that is helping others. I need to be the person in the house you don't want to tell her if you used. And I got a commitment at the meeting that was right there at the Sober Living. And listen, I didn't have a car. I couldn't drive anywhere, but I got a commitment at a meeting that I could get to. And that was a huge change for me. And that was part of me taking a stand as like a person in recovery. I chose recovery versus that half-life. So that's one thing that I did. And it's one thing to take those kind of actions, distance yourself from people that you used with. But then there are emotional, internal triggers that make you want to use. And so at that same time, my sponsor had me write about the relapse. And that was always my step one with my sponsor because I kept relapsing. And it's like, we're way past the timeline, right? For those of you guys that are 12-step people. And you don't have to be a 12-step person to do this. He said, write about the last relapse, write about the last relapse. And I did. And this is what my last relapse had looked like. So we're January of 2015, right? That I'm talking about. In October of 2014, so a few months prior, I had been at a long-term program that, looking back, was actually a really amazing program that I very much took for granted at the time. But I'd been at this long-term program and I got a job. I got a job at a really fancy boutique in Carlsbad, which is a pretty like high-end area of North County, San Diego. And I used to be kind of a high-end chick, and I taught bar and Pilates there. And bar and Pilates are very bougie workouts. They've been a little bit more democratized now, but especially back then, they were incredibly expensive, very bougie. And that was the world that I was in prior to getting strung out. So I got a job at a really fancy boutique in my old area where I used to teach. And I had nothing. Like I mentioned, I'd been, homeless for years and years and years. I had nothing. But I got this job, I interview well, like I could still present well, I get this job and I go to the first day and I was like desperately trying to figure out what I should wear because I don't know what's in style anymore. I don't know. I was living in a doghouse. Like I don't know what people are wearing. And so I'm fishing stuff out of our donations bins and the other girls are kind of trying to help me get dressed up and I go to work for my first day. And the other thing was they asked you to leave your purse in your car. and just bring in what you needed, and they put it in a plastic bag because I guess they'd had issues with theft from employees. But like, I didn't have a car to leave my purse in, and so I was just carrying my stuff, and like, that's not that big of a deal. But another thing for me was feeling like a loser because I was always on public transportation at almost 35 years old, and so that just felt so, it just highlighted that I was not like the other people that worked there. You know, I didn't have a car to leave my stuff in. So like, there was that, but whatever, I got past that. And after the first day, the owner walked up and said, okay, so you did a great job today, but I do have a request. So tomorrow when you come back, I would love for you to kind of dress this up a little bit, maybe accessorize, because you look like you could just be a girl shopping here. And we want you to look like you're someone that works here. So it's like, you know, fashion +1 because you work here. And I said, okay, all right, you know, I can do that. And I take the bus back to my rehab, and I'm going through the donations, and I don't know what to wear. You know, we don't have much stuff there. And I remember I fished out like a hat, like a big hat and some boots. And I'm like, I don't know, do people wear hats? I don't know. And the next day I go to work, and it had a big window when you walked up, like a display window. And as I walk up, I see myself in the window with this big dumb hat that I don't know if this is in style or not. And I stopped short. I stopped in my tracks and looked at myself in the reflection. And I remember thinking, you look like an idiot. What are you doing? You're not fooling anyone. You're not a real girl. You're not a regular girl. You haven't been a regular girl in a long time. And it's obvious. You are not like these girls. You are not like these girls. And everyone knows. And I turned around and walked to a CVS where I knew I could buy rigs, and got my needles and went in the parking lot. I called a guy I used to use with. This is prior to me deleting everybody later, right? Called a guy that I used to use with. He had just gotten out of prison, which I knew. He'd been on a parole violation, and I called him. And he took like 20 minutes to get to me. Long enough for me to stand there, holding my phone, looking around, the store's calling me, thinking, you are blowing up your life again on purpose right now. And I had like 94 days. This is the time I got 94 days. And I just couldn't stop myself because I had been overwhelmed with that feeling of just like worthlessness. Sure enough, he came and got me. I used, and I got kicked out of that program 3 weeks later, maybe. And then I go into a sober living for the last time where I get kicked out, live in the doghouse, blah, blah, blah. Now we're January 2015, right? I delete my contacts. I'm writing about that relapse. And I realized that obviously it wasn't about the hat or the clothes. I felt worthless because of my history. And I realized that the feeling was worthlessness. The feeling was less than, triggered by other women having nicer things, right? Because I'd kind of been in that world. That was vital for me to write down and be aware of. That was vital for me to know. Okay, when other women have nicer stuff than you, you feel like dog shit and you want to go use. Let's be aware of this, because then what does that get you? That gets you another 2 or 3 years of wearing donation clothes in that moment, right? Or we could just sit through this, and in a couple of months, you can buy yourself something from Lululemon or whatever. Wrote that out. And it was crucial for me to know that, because in January, February, I start working with my friend Jana, who I still work with 10 years later, teaching fitness at a really bougie place. All of the women are decked head to toe, Lululemon, Aloe, and I had old beat Nikes. They were black with pink swoosh, and they were so old and beat there was a giant hole in the toe, and so I could only wear black socks. Otherwise, you would see my toe poking out. So I've got my beat ass shoes, donation bin clothes, and my boss Jana had really nice stuff. To this day, she's got very nice stuff. And those first couple of times I was around her, I remember thinking like, ugh, I'm such a loser. But because I had written that down, I knew to look for that. And I was like, okay, Janine, we've been here before. Yep, you might feel like a loser because you're not wearing anything nice and this is all Goodwill stuff. But what does it get you to feel that way to the point where you use to get out of it? More years of goodwill stuff, right? More years of using, further away from your goal of getting back in alignment with someone that could wear something nice, right? And for me, having that information was vital. That moment when I ran into my friend at the McDonald's, y'all, I'm telling you, for 5 years, that's the moment I go. That's the moment where it all falls apart. That's the moment where I go in that bathroom, I do that, and then I get kicked out, maybe even that day, soon after that, and then I'm back homeless again, burned another sober living bridge. That's the day. But I took that moment and instead did something different, and then did my best to prevent it in the future by deleting contacts and blocking people, and then writing that down and knowing that that feeling of less than, which actually happened in 2 circumstances. It would happen with like women wearing nicer clothes, and then also being on public transportation was a big one for me. Not even just the less than aspect, but being so tired. Like, I'm a really tired person anyways. I'm very fatigued. And even though I teach fitness, like I'm so tired all the time, you guys. And being on public transportation would make me even more tired. And in San Diego, it's not like New York where the subway just gets you somewhere quickly. I mean, it's 3 hours on a bus to get something that you could drive to 30 minutes away, right? Like, it's not really built for public transportation, and it would make me so tired. So realizing that public transportation made me feel less than and exhausted me. Seeing other women wearing nicer stuff, especially nicer fitness clothes too, I think in particular, because I had used to teach in these bougie areas. And then seeing old friends, usually guy friends, that I really didn't want to hurt their feelings. Those were the things that would take me right back out. That was vital information for me to have. My goal here for you guys would be to hear those stories and maybe assess out in your own experience, okay, sure, what has led to me using? Is there someone that I really need to cut ties with? Not forever, not forever. If I saw that guy tomorrow, I'd be like, what's up? You know, not forever. But in the moment when I was still so vulnerable, like I said, they're not bad people, but their life choices do not align with my current life goals. And what am I going to do? And I can't pick being polite to an old homeboy over my whole future. I mean, it was in my mid-30s, you know? Hope that you guys can pull from that something that is valuable for you. Stay in the fight. We do recover. I highly recommend getting around people that are sober also. What saved me was that I ran up and saw my friend, my sober living manager, who said that thing. If I'd seen somebody that wasn't in recovery, they might have been like, hey, good for you, and just dropped it there. But I needed the extra step of deleting people. So I highly recommend connecting with a sober community. Doesn't have to be 12-step. The Phoenix app is out there. I don't work for them or anything, but there's a free app where you can find people that are doing like sober pickleball and goofy stuff like that. But whatever, you know, sober meetups or 12-step. And if you are going to go the 12-step route, finding a sponsor that you can call in moments like that. So stay in the fight. We do recover. I would love to hear any feedback from you guys, and also what you would like to hear from me next. Like, what is your biggest struggle in early sobriety or later in sobriety? I've gone through a lot of it in 10 years, and I would love to share my experience as well. So thank you guys so much.